If everything that you thought you knew was turned upside down, opposite from your point of view, how would you feel if the ground was really the sky? And all of this time you've been walking when you could have been flying. If you run 1,000 miles a minute, you can't expect to wear out a few pairs of shoes. If you forget how to love and take it for granted, you can't expect to wear out people close to you. And what if all the birds were flying just to show us, and all the trees were really holding the sky up, and everything that you do matters somehow? What if heaven and hell was right now? How would it be if you really created your life? Stories you told, the good and bad, that they come alive. And how would it change if your words were like nails and wood? You build your house, but you forget that it's just a house. You can rebuild it. Oh yes. And what if all the birds were flying just to show us, and all the trees were really holding the sky up, and everything that you do matters in the end? What if all of our mistakes are forgiven? What if love is a lot of listening, a little bit of time, not pretending we are caught up in a world of daydreams? What if loving what you have is everything? And what if all the birds were flying just to show us, and all the trees were really holding the sky up, and everything that you do matters so much? How would you change your life? Oh yeah. Oh. How would it be if everything that you thought you knew was turned upside down, opposite from your point of view?
Oh, don't you just love her? I was telling her Friday night, among Erin, I have several other friends that have been her fans for years, and Friday night was my first experience of her. But every time they would talk about her, they would get this kind of glazed look in their eyes and this dreamy expression, and they'd be like, Ellis. I get it now. I totally get it. And I'm so glad she's here during this series because she just embodies that idea of authenticity and embracing our humanity, doesn't she? Yeah. Well, I'm glad to be back with you. This is week 3 of our exploration and conversation about Rising Strong by the work of Brené Brown. And just to kind of share a little bit about where we've been so far in our journey, we had week 1, which was the reckoning. And that was our time to really look at our stories and to not just skip to the end of the story, but to really look at the juicy middle parts of that story. The parts where we had to really call upon our strength and our faith and hang on to a shred of hope and all those qualities that we developed that got us through to the end of that story so that we could acknowledge them and use those going forward. And it also was an invitation for us to get curious about our stories, what they were about, why they were here, what was showing up, what we could learn from them. So Brené, in her book Rising Strong, says this. Now, I want you to keep in mind, these are Brené's words, not mine. People who wade into discomfort and vulnerability and tell the truth about their stories are the real badasses. Brené's words, not mine. And we moved from that reckoning into the rumble, where we began to rumble with our unworthiness and learn that love is not about making us feel safe, but that love is there to invite us into a sense of aliveness, to prod us and poke us and challenge us and question our illusions so that we could remember who we really are. And as we move through Lent, I invited you to, rather than give up chocolate, or in Ellis's case, coffee. I mean, you can do that if you want. But instead, to give up unworthiness, to take the journey to wholeness. Well, today, the revolution begins. Are you ready? Got your seatbelts fastened? Brené says this: the Rising Strong process can lead to deep, tumultuous, groundbreaking, and no turning back transformation. When this process becomes a practice, a way of engaging with the world, there is no doubt that it ignites revolutionary change. It changes us and it changes the people around us. It's a practice. It's a way of engaging with the world. So what is that practice? That practice is about choosing authenticity and worthiness. That is an absolute act of revolution. Authenticity and worthiness. She goes on to say, choosing to live and love with your whole heart is an act of defiance. You're going to confuse, tick off, and terrify lots of people, including yourself. One minute you pray that the transformation stops, and the next minute you pray that it never ends. You also wonder how you can feel so brave and so afraid at the same time. I love that because, we applaud this idea of fearlessness. There is no such thing. There's no such thing as fearlessness. We are in this human experience. And if we're going to live big, if we're going to risk big, if we're going to be vulnerable, if we're going to dream, we're going to come face to face with our fear. The only question is whether we let that stop us or whether we just move on through and invite it to have a conversation with us. Fear can simply be a sign that you are about something big. She says it is a movement where we can take to the streets with our messy, imperfect, wild, stretch-marked, wonderful, and heartbreaking, grace-filled, and joy-filled lives. A movement fueled by the freedom that comes when we stop pretending. So, I'm going to make a revolutionary statement right now. What if the parts of ourselves that we disown are the actual dwelling places of the divine? What if those things within us that we don't want to feel, we don't want to own, our negativity, our fear, our frustration, our judgment, what if those are the very dwelling places of the divine? So let's think about that. Because sometimes we like to think, well, I'm not judgmental. I'm not a judgmental person. I never get jealous. I don't get angry. I'm not egotistical. I'm never selfish. You might even say you would never kill another human being. Well, I say to all that it is BS. And I mean bypassing spirit. I don't know what you all were thinking. But we are not here to be robots. We weren't created as robots. We were created as human beings. And part of being human means we feel all those things. We don't deny them. We embrace them. We let them connect us because you know what? I've felt all of those things. Just this week, I was judging those idiots, people, who choose blind faith while ignoring any scientific evidence that might challenge that faith. Just this week, I got really envious of my 25-year-old coworker who sat there and ate an entire sleeve of Girl Scout cookies and didn't gain an ounce. And I got really angry at that person driving in the left lane, going 10 miles under the speed limit. And I may or may not have used some foul language. If it was you, I apologize. And you better believe if somebody was holding a knife to my child's throat, I would take them out in an instant. We are supposed to feel those things because we are human beings. We were not created as robots. We were created as living, being, feeling entities. And the thing we have to keep in mind, and the thing that I think that scares us about feeling at depth, is that those emotions are wonderful servants, but horrible masters. And that's where we get it confused, because we feel like, at times, that if we are going to experience those things, they're going to take us over. But the thing is, they are here to serve in our awakening. They're here to help us fully engage in this experience that we're in right now. And they are here to help us reveal the divine. You know, last week we talked a little bit about integrity and what integrity was, and that definition that it is whole and undivided. It's coming from a place of being whole and undivided. And that's not at the exclusion of other people. When we stand in integrity with ourselves, with our own truth, with what we know at a deep level, then we are better able to serve others, be present to others, be in joy for others. Someone once said, I love this, if you can't say no, then your yes means nothing. If you can't say no, then your yes means nothing. Sometimes the most generous acts that take place have incredibly selfish motives. Because if we are unwilling to say no, then we're giving out of a sense of obligation, we're giving out of a sense that we're not worthy enough, so we have to be validated by being this volunteer of the year, by always being there for our friend, by always bringing the cupcakes for the school play. And sometimes the ability to say, no, I can't be there for you, is the most compassionate thing we can say to someone. Authenticity and worthiness are acts of revolution. I love the idea that was first coined in 1984 by John Wellwood called spiritual bypass. Have you heard that term used? And I recently came across this article by this man named Jeff Brown, who I don't know where he came from, but all of a sudden he started showing up on my Facebook, and I just love his stuff. Anyway, spiritual bypass is defined as the tendency to jump to spirit prematurely in an effort to avoid various aspects of earthly reality. Jeff says, it's like being on a pogo stick to the stars. I enjoyed the opportunity to pseudo-transcend the dualities before inevitably crashing back to earth to deal with my unfinished business. And so he gives us 10 different ways that we practice spiritual bypass. The first, and I think we can probably relate to this in Unity, is the positivity bypass. It is the idea that it's all good. We'll just say an affirmation and all that yucky stuff's going to go away. Instead, maybe we're avoiding, you think? He also talks about the cerebral bypass, where we over-intellectualize the moment, head-tripping in an effort to detach from the world of feeling. The smarter you are, the better you are at this. The witness bypass, the tendency to live in witness-observer consciousness, to stare at our unresolved pain body across the room and imagine that we are present to it. To confuse helpful detachment practices with living itself. The pragmatism bypass, focusing on practical reality in an effort to avoid an experience of unity, the bigger picture, often manifest in great success in the material world, but a spiritually bankrupt life. The all-in-one bypass. This is remaining perpetually focused on unity consciousness in an effort to avoid our particular issues, challenges, and practical needs, often manifest in an ungrounded inability to meet grounded basic needs while floating off into the great mystery. This is those times where you get all caught up in the idea of spiritual bliss and, meditating for hours at a time, but it becomes a way of escaping reality. The non-duality bypass, the tendency to self-identify as a non-dualist in an effort to transcend the human fray. Non-dual bypassers tend to conveniently remove everything that makes them uncomfortable with their unified framework in an effort to transcend their humanness. Without it, we can't grow towards an authentic, sustainable experience of non-separateness. We need our experience of humanity in order to come to a place of wholeness. The accountability bypass, the tendency to use mere reflection and no judgment techniques in an effort to sidestep our own responsibility or the responsibility of others for wrong action. We tend to be peaceful people. We tend to like that whole idea, but sometimes we use that as an excuse not to hold people accountable in our life. And sometimes we use it as an excuse not to hold ourselves accountable. The "you are not your story" bypass. He says, at the heart of our story are the spiritual identifications, emotional material, and unresolved issues that are the grist for the soul mill for our spiritual expansion. It's what we've been talking about the last few weeks. Our stories are where the juiciness comes in, where we get to see where we're really made of. The karmic contract bypass. Oh, this is a good one. You must have chosen it. Everything happens for a reason. What was in your consciousness that created this? And lastly, the forgiveness bypass, the tendency to avoid unresolved emotions and relational experiences by feigning forgiveness. He calls it premature forgiveness, as though forgiving a wrongdoer is more important than healing itself. Can you relate to any of those? No, we don't have any of those here, do we? I absolutely love Jesus, and I hate a whole lot of what has been done in his name. Jesus was a revolutionary. He was a rebel. He took a radical stand for love, and that was the reason he was crucified. He wasn't a bystander. He was fully engaged in the experience of being human. We see time after time stories of him throughout the Bible. Cursing the fig tree. Bargaining with God, is there any way I can get out of this whole crucifixion thing? Is there another road maybe I can take? He cried, he wept. Shortest passage in the Bible, he wept. He felt. He had compassion. Reza Aslan, in her book, The Zealot, says he was a politically conscious Jewish revolutionary who 2,000 years ago walked through the Galilean countryside gathering followers for a messianic movement with the goal of establishing the kingdom of God. He was arrested and executed after a provocative entry into Jerusalem and a brazen attack on the temple. He rebelled against authority. He rebelled against the church. He rebelled against the politics, not for the sake of rebelling, but because of a truth that lived in him that wouldn't allow him to sit back. She says, if we place Jesus firmly within the social, religious, and political context of the era in which he lived, an era marked by the slow burn of a revolt against Rome that would forever transform the faith and practice of Judaism, then we get a truer picture of who he was. He was a politically conscious Jewish revolutionary. Does that sound like anybody today? I'm not going to get into politics. I will leave that to the Pope. But I like to look at the history of Christianity, because when you really study about the early Christians, the ones that were around before the church messed everything up, you find that they were this generous group of people that were all about serving, that they were healers. They laid their hands on people. They prayed with them. They accepted whoever came to their door. They fed them. They believed in a God that created humankind in the image and likeness of love. And it was that practice of loving kindness that began to mark them in the eyes of their enemies. And sometimes that enemy was even the church itself. So in the days before Constantine, the Christians were a diverse group of people, expressing in various ways in different parts of the land. And one of those groups was the Gnostics. The Gnostics' overarching philosophy was to know thyself is to know God. And they paint a very different picture of Jesus. This group of people were eventually labeled as heretics, which of course made me want to read more about them. But what was it that made them heretics? Well, it was because they were believers, or they weren't believers, they were seekers. So whereas the church was asking people to believe whatever it was, the agenda was they were trying to push, these were people who were seeking truth. They were seeking understanding. They were seeking to know God at a deeper level. And for that reason, they were labeled heretics, because they didn't believe that you needed to go out here to find God, but that God was in here. To know thyself is to know God. And one of the Gospels that is attributed to the Gnostics is the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas, when Constantine gathered a council together and they decided which books of the Bible were going to be acceptable and which Gospels were going to be a part of the New Testament, this book was rejected because it was considered a heretical book. So, of course, that's what we're going to talk about today. One of the passages in the Gospel of Thomas is that Jesus said, if those who lead you say to you, look, the kingdom is in the sky, then the birds will get there first. If they say it's in the ocean, then the fish will get there first. But if the kingdom of God is within you and outside of you, once you come to know yourself, you will become known. And you will know that it is you who are the children of the living God. But if you will not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and it is you who is that poverty. He was kind of throwing down a challenge there, wasn't he? He was saying, know yourself. And if you don't, it's at the sacrifice of knowing God, knowing truth. He talked about the kingdom of God as a state of consciousness. And the heresy was that he also talked about how you don't need anyone out here to give that to you, to explain that to you. That all the answers are within. And he warned that that search within is going to challenge and disturb you. Kind of like our journey in Rising Strong, huh? He says, let the one who seeks not stop seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will become troubled. When he becomes troubled, he will be astonished and will rule over all things. When we were talking about love last week, we were talking about how we have this mistaken notion that it's about safety and security, when actually it's about awakening us and bringing us alive. It's about shaking our clinging to ideas, definitions, illusion. And love will never stop until we recognize the truth of who we are, until we recognize that innate divinity that we were created in. It goes on in the Gospel of Thomas to say, if you bring forth what is within you, you will bring forth what will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. It's the whole conversation we've been having about feeling and the importance of connecting with those feelings. Because when we deny them, they become the masters that make our choices for us. They become the place of reactivity where we respond from maybe not our best place. But when honored, when felt, when explored, when we get curious about them, then they are there to serve our awakening. There's this great book that I have given out numerous times to people in my counseling and coaching practice called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers by Debbie Ford. And the reason I love it is because she really talks about how we as light chasers, as spiritual warriors, have to embrace our shadow. She says that everything we hate, resist, or disown about ourselves takes on a life of its own, undermining our feelings of worthiness. When we come face to face with our dark side, our first instinct is to turn away, and the second is to bargain with it to leave us alone. When we locked away those parts of ourselves we didn't like, unknowingly we sealed away our most valuable treasures. When we get curious about our stories, when we challenge our perceptions, when we come to know ourselves at a deeper level and embrace the middle of the story where things don't look so pretty, we come into a place of wholeness and acceptance. It is not about separating from our humanity and somehow making that less than. It is about embracing our humanity and knowing that it is there that our divinity dwells. Jesus didn't give an example of an emotionless human. He loved radically. He challenged authority. He rejected. He revolted. He got upset with the hypocrisy that he saw going around him. He spoke up against the cruelty he saw, the exclusion he saw. He was a badass. Okay, that one's on me. But we live under the impression that for something to be divine, it has to be perfect. But what if being divine means we are willing to get messy, we are willing to be real, we are willing to share in our humanity? I was saying to Ellis earlier, I think that's, your music is so beautiful, but anybody who was there Friday night, it was your willingness to be authentic and human that draws people to you, because it's such a joy. So let this woman be an example for you. She didn't try to be perfect. She embraced her imperfection. And didn't that make you feel more connected to her? Wow, what if we all did that? What if we were all willing to be that human and that real and that authentic? First of all, it's very freeing. Because to try to keep up appearances is just exhausting, isn't it? That's just way too much work for me. I can't handle it. Choosing authenticity and owning our worthiness are acts of revolution. To know thyself is to know God. That's what the Gnostic Christians taught. That's what the Jesus taught that they portrayed in the book of Thomas. To believe that we are meant to be perfect, always peaceful, never rattled, never critical, never judgmental, faultless beings is to strip away our humanity, and to strip away our humanity is to strip away our divinity. There's one more beautiful passage from the Gospel of Thomas. If they say to you, "Where did you come from?" say to them, "We came from the light, the place where the light came into being by itself and was revealed through their image." If they say to you, "Who are you?" say, "We are its children, the chosen of the living God." We are its children. So there's a woman that you may have heard of in the news from time to time in the last few years. Her name is Malala Yousafzai. And on the afternoon of October 9th, 2012, Malala was on the school bus on her way to school when some gunmen boarded the bus, called her out by name, and shot her 3 times. One shot entered her forehead, traveled down her face, and went into her shoulder, where it was lodged. She spent months in intensive care, a good period of time unconscious. Her crime was that she believed in the education of girls in her country, in Pakistan. They sought her out because she dared to take a stand for that. Well, we need to remember that before Malala was able to speak out, she had to learn to talk once again. She had to go through some days of healing, some days of despair, and I have to believe there had to have been at least a thought or two of revenge, or maybe some fear around going back out there. But she didn't let that stop her, did she? She recovered, and she began to speak out. She began to speak out wherever she could to whoever listened about the importance of educating girls, and that it not only was the future of Pakistan dependent upon that, but the future of the world was dependent upon that. And the more she spoke, the more people listened, until she was eventually invited to speak at the UN. Following that, the UN created a petition demanding that all children worldwide be in school by 2015. And in Pakistan, they ratified a bill, which was the first one of its kind, to educate all people. She was in Time magazine in their 100 most interesting people in 2013, 14, and 15. And in 2014, she was the co-recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. Malala says, "I tell my story not because it is unique. It is not. It is the story of those who struggle everywhere. I don't want revenge on the Taliban. I want education for their sons and daughters. My goal was not to win the Nobel Peace Prize, but to see the education of every child." And her motto has become, "One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world." One person, one person, one person, one person can change the world. So let's grab our manifesto, shall we? It's on the back of your bulletin. It's our manifesto of the brave and brokenhearted that we are reading at the end of every talk this week, that we are revisiting during the week as we hang it on our fridge as a reminder of our courage. So if you would like, you can close your eyes and listen, or if you want, you can speak it with me. There is no greater threat to the critics and cynics and fearmongers than those of us who are willing to fall because we have learned to rise. With skinned knees and bruised hearts, we choose owning our stories of struggle, over hiding, over hustling, over pretending. When we deny our stories, they define us. When we run from struggle, we are never free. So we turn towards truth and look it in the eye. We will not be characters in our stories, not villains, not victims, not even heroes. We are the authors of our lives. We write our own daring endings. We craft love from heartache, compassion from shame, grace from disappointment, courage from failure. Showing up is our power. Story is our way home. Truth is our song. We are the brave and the brokenhearted, and we are rising strong. And so it is. Amen.